They say the safest lies are the ones nobody thinks to question, not the grand deceptions, not the elaborate performances, the small ones, the ordinary ones, the kind that hide inside the rhythm of daily life so completely that after enough years, even the liar forgets what the truth felt like. Wren had been lying for 10 years, 3,650 days of careful breath, of kept eyes, of hands that never shook when they should have, of a name that was not his name, and a nature that was not his nature, and a life built entirely on the simple, desperate foundation of survival. He had been 17 when he first walked through the gates of Ashenvale Palace, wearing a dead man's work clothes and a story he had practiced until it had grooves worn into it like a path through the woods, or just another human boy looking for kitchen work. No family, no pack, no past worth mentioning. Just hands willing to scrub, and a mouth willing to stay quiet, and eyes that knew, instinctively, where not to look. Nobody questioned him. Why would they? The palace needed workers, and workers needed wages, and the world had enough suffering in it already without looking too closely at one more boy with hollow cheeks and careful eyes. What they did not know, what nobody knew, was that beneath the plain clothes and the human story and the careful ordinariness of him, Wren was an Omega, not a powerful one, not the last of some ancient bloodline, not carrying secret gifts or hidden destiny, just an Omega, which in the kingdom of Ashenvale was reason enough to be collared and sold and spent like coin before his 25th year. The Omega trade had been legal for 60 years, sanctioned by the council, blessed by 3 different high priests in succession. Omegas were registered at birth, documented, assigned. The ones from wealthy families were managed quietly. The ones from nowhere, the ones with nobody to advocate for them, the ones like Wren had been at 17. Those ones ended up in the trade halls before the year was out. He had run the night before his registration was due, and he had been running ever since, except now he was standing still, and that required a different kind of courage entirely. Every morning before the kitchen fires were lit, Wren stood in the small cracked mirror above his cot in the servants' quarters and did the only magic he possessed. Not ethereal power, not ancient gifts, on just the practiced discipline of 10 years spent becoming invisible. He checked his suppressants, the small grey tablets he had been buying illegally from a contact in the lower city for a decade, each one costing him a day's wages, each one buying him another week of safety. He checked his scent. He checked the careful blankness of his expression. He checked that nothing in his face or his posture or the way he moved through a room would give a trained nose the information it was looking for. Then he went to work. And for 10 years, it had been enough. If you are already afraid for him, you should be. But stay with me, because this is not a story about being caught. It is a story about being found, and those are very different things. The morning everything changed began like every other morning. Wren was at the bread table before dawn, kneading dough with the methodical rhythm that had become his prayer. The kitchen was warm and smelled of flour and wood smoke and the particular safety of routine. Around him, the other servants moved through their tasks, sleepy and comfortable in the easy familiarity of people who have worked together long enough to become furniture to each other. Then Darvan, the head cook, said it from the doorway, with the energy of a man dropping a stone into a still pond. The king returns, 3 days early from the Eastern campaign, Wren's hands stilled in the dough. King Calum Ashenvale, 29 years old. Alpha, 5 years on a throne he had inherited when his father was killed in the border wars. The stories about him were the kind that grew in the telling, that his wolf could track a lie through stone walls, whilst that he had once held a summit negotiation for 14 hours without eating and smiled the entire time, that he had the patience of something geological and the temper, when finally roused, of something geological collapsing. Wren had been carefully not encountering him for 5 years. He kept to the kitchens during court functions. He disappeared into the servant passages when the king's schedule brought him anywhere near the residential wing. He had constructed his existence in Ashenvale Palace like a map with one very specific territory marked. Here there be danger. But sometimes, deep in the night, when the suppressants made his head ache and the loneliness of 10 years pressed down like weather. He felt something he had no name for, a pull in his chest like a compass needle swinging toward north, like his body was trying to tell him something his mind refused to hear. He always put it down to nerves. He always went back to sleep. The kitchen erupted into motion around him. Ren forced his hands back into the dough and told himself today was no different from any other day. The king came back early. Kings did that. It had nothing to do with him. It had never had anything to do with him. He believed this right up until the kitchen door opened and the room went very, very quiet. The king was not supposed to inspect the kitchens personally. He had stewards for that. He had a whole hierarchy of staff whose entire purpose was to stand between the throne and the bread table. Alpha kings did not arrive in kitchens at dawn, smelling of road dust and campaign leather, to ask questions about grain suppliers. And yet, Calum Ashenvile moved through the kitchen like weather, not aggressive, not loud, simply inevitable, the way that certain kinds of presence fill a room without trying. He was taller than Ren had expected from a distance, broader. His hair was the dark brown of deep water, and his eyes were a shade that Ren could not name from where he stood, keeping his gaze carefully on the dough. He heard the king's voice asking questions, heard Davan answering and tripping over his own words, heard the footsteps moving between the preparation tables, measured, deliberate, circling, and then the boots stopped directly in front of Ren's table. Davan answered before Ren could. "Ren, Your Majesty. Been with us nearly 10 years now. Quiet worker, reliable. Ren." The king said the name the way you say a word when you are testing whether it is the right one. Well, look at me. It was not a command. Alpha commands carried a different quality, a pressure behind the words that the body responded to before the mind caught up. This was softer than that, quieter, which made it, somehow, harder to refuse. Ren raised his head. Their eyes met, and the world did something it had never done before in 10 years of careful, invisible living. It noticed, not an explosion, not lightning, just a sudden, terrible clarity, like a room you have been moving through in the dark, and then someone lights a candle, and you see exactly where everything is, and realize how long you have been navigating by memory alone. The king's eyes were grey, not cold grey, the grey of sky before rain, holding light inside it, and they were fixed on Ren with an expression that Ren could not read, and that frightened him more than any expression he could have read. "Where are you from?" the king asked. "The village of Merin, Your Majesty," Ren said, the lie smooth as silk, practiced thousands of times. "My family died of the fever 8 years ago. I came to the city looking for work." "The fever," the king said, his head tilting slightly. "Yes, many were lost during that time." He knew, not what Ren was, not yet, but he knew that the answer was not the answer. Ren could see it in the stillness of him, the particular quality of attention that a wolf gives, something it has not yet decided what to do with. He reached for one of the half-shaped loaves on the table, and his fingers brushed Ren's in passing. It lasted less than a second. It felt like falling. Ren's suppressants were good, but they were not magic, and whatever his body had been trying to tell him for 5 years chose that exact moment to become extremely loud about it. He pulled his hand back too fast. The loaf fell between them, and for one horrible fraction of a second, he felt it, the thing he had been suppressing for a decade, the warmth at the base of his throat that an omega's scent gland produces when it recognizes something it wants to recognize. He dropped his eyes immediately. "You will serve at tonight's welcome feast," the king said. Davan started to protest. "Ren works in the kitchens, Your Majesty. He is not trained for the hall. Tonight he serves," the king said, his tone not unkind, but simply settled. "You will pour wine at the high table." He was already at the door when he stopped, did not turn fully, just enough. "Your hands, Ren." He said it quietly enough that only Ren could hear. "They are shaking." Then he was gone, and the kitchen breathed again. But Ren stood at the bread table with flour on his arms, and his heart hammering against his ribs, and the terrible knowledge that the map he had been living by for 10 years had just been redrawn. "I need you to hit that like button right now if you are already feeling this, because I promise you this story is only getting started, and what comes next is going to break your heart in the best possible way." The great hall at night was a different world from the kitchens. Wren stood in his borrowed serving clothes, deep grey that actually fit for once, and tried to make himself into furniture the way he always did. Head down, hands steady, move, paw, step back, disappear. The nobility of Ashenvale arrived in waves of silk and calculation. He recognized faces from 5 years of careful peripheral vision. Lord Aldrich, with his collector's eyes, the man who had made his fortune in the first decade of the Omega trade. Lady Voss, who smiled at everyone the same way, regardless of whether she was greeting them or ending them. The council members who had drafted the Registration Act, sitting at their seats with the comfortable ease of men who have never had to consider whether a law applied to them. Then the announcement that turned Wren's blood to ice water. His Majesty King Calum Ashenvale and honoured guest, Grand Registrar Silas Morn of the Omega Commission. The Omega Commission, the body that oversaw the trade, that processed the documentation, that sent hunters after the ones who ran and collected bounties for the ones they returned. Silas Morn was 60 years old, thin as a blade, with the practiced pleasantness of someone who had done terrible things so long they no longer registered as terrible. At his belt hung a reader, a small iron device that could detect Omega scent signatures through most common suppressants. Wren took his position at the high table and became very, very still inside. The meal began. Wine was poured. Wren moved through it all with the automaticity of someone who has trained their body to function while their mind is doing something else entirely. And the king watched him. Not obviously, not in a way that anyone at the table would have noticed. But Wren had spent 10 years learning to read the quality of attention in a room without appearing to look, and Calum Ashenvale's attention had a particular quality that he was increasingly unable to ignore. It felt like being the only candle in a dark room and trying to pretend you were not lit. The Grand Registrar was speaking about efficiency, about updated reader technology, about the backlog in unregistered cases. We believe several hundred unregistered Omegas are currently living as humans in the capital alone, Morn said pleasantly, cutting his meat with the precision of someone discussing inventory. The new reader detects even the most aggressive pharmaceutical suppression. We have been conducting quiet sweeps in the residential quarters, and we expect to clear the backlog entirely within the season. That Wren poured wine into Lord Aldrich's glass, and kept his breathing even, and did not think about the device on Morn's belt, and did not think about how close the Grand Registrar was sitting, and did not think about the way Morn's eyes had passed over him twice already, with the assessing quality of a man in the habit of assessing. Then a hand closed around his wrist. Lord Aldrich, drunk and expansive, looking up at him with the particular entitlement of a man who has never been told no by anyone he considered below him. "You are a pretty thing," he said, "too fine for pouring wine." Perhaps the king would be willing to discuss. The rage came from somewhere so deep and so old that Wren almost did not catch it in time. Almost. His scent spiked, just for a moment. Just a fraction of a second. Just enough. He watched it happen in slow motion. The slight widening of Morn's eyes. The hand moving toward the reader at his belt. The smile beginning to form. Then the king's voice came down the table like something dropped from a height. "Lord Aldrich, you forget yourself. Release him and apologize, or leave the hall." Aldrich's hand dropped. He mumbled something that passed for an apology. Wren stepped back, his wrist free, his heart rate somewhere north of reason. But Morn had not taken his eyes off him. "How fascinating," the Grand Registrar said, his voice carrying the careful pleasantness of someone who has just found what they were looking for. "Your Majesty, with your permission, a brief demonstration of the Commission's new reader technology." The king said nothing, which was not the same as permission. Morn stood anyway. The reader in his hand was already active, as its iron needle trembling. He moved around the table with the deliberateness of a man who knew exactly what he was going to find, and was savoring the approach. Wren looked at the door, calculated the distance, calculated the guards, calculated 10 years of knowing exactly where every exit in this palace was, and what it would cost him to use one. He was already measuring the odds when the king stood. He did not do it loudly. He did not make a speech. He simply rose from his chair and stepped between Wren and the Grand Registrar. and said, in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall without effort, "Put it away." Morn stopped. His pleasant expression did not change, but something behind it did. "Your Majesty, the Commission has authority to conduct assessments at any." "Put it away," Calum said again, "or I will put it away for you and you will not enjoy how I do it." The hall had gone entirely silent. Morn looked at the reader in his hand, looked at the king, looked at the grey eyes that were currently communicating something that had no room for misinterpretation. He put it away. "Tomorrow morning," the king said, turning to address the court with the ease of a man who has just closed a minor item of business, "we will be reviewing the Commission's operational mandate within Ashenvale. I have some questions about jurisdiction." He looked at Morn with a smile that was the same temperature as deep water. "I trust you will make yourself available," the meal resumed. Wren stood behind the high table with his wine jug and his steady hands and his 10 years of practiced invisibility and tried to understand what had just happened. The king did not look at him again for the rest of the evening, but as the hall emptied and Wren moved to collect the last of the table settings, he found a single folded note tucked beneath a wine glass near his station. It said, "The East Library, now come alone." And below that, in smaller writing, "I am not going to hurt you. I need you to believe that before you decide whether to come." The East Library was the oldest part of the palace, its shelves climbing 2 stories and its windows looking out over the mountain dark. Moonlight came through in silver bars and made the dust motes look like snow. Wren stood just inside the door and watched the king standing at the window with his back turned and tried to decide whether 10 years of careful survival had brought him to the right place or the wrong one. Calum turned. "How long?" he asked. There was no accusation in it, just the question. 10 years, Wren said, "since I was 17. The king nodded slowly, like this was information he was placing next to something he already knew, checking whether it matched. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I want you to know that I am telling you because you deserve the truth in exchange for yours, not because I need anything from you." "The Commission," Calum said, "they have been operating in this kingdom for 60 years on a mandate my grandfather signed. I have been building a case against them since my 3rd year on the throne. What happened in the hall tonight was not coincidence. Morn was invited here because I wanted him in a room where I could watch him, and because I wanted the court to see what he is." He looked at Wren steadily. "I did not know you were here. I did not use you. I want you to know that." Wren looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because tomorrow I am going to begin the process of dismantling the Commission entirely," the king said, his voice level in the way that things are level when a great deal of effort has gone into making them so. "It will take time. It will be ugly, and when it becomes known what I am doing, people who have been hiding will have to decide whether to trust that I am doing it in good faith. I would like at least one of them to have had the conversation first." The silence in the library was the kind that follows something that has been a long time coming. "What do you want from me?" Wren asked. "Nothing," the king said. "That is what I am trying to tell you. And as for 5 years I have felt something that I did not understand and could not name, and that my wolf would not let me ignore. I am not asking you to explain it. I am not asking you to do anything about it. I just wanted you to know that when I look at you, I see you, not what you are hiding, not what you could be worth to someone. You." Wren stood in the moonlit library and felt something he had not felt in 10 years crack open inside his chest. Not the break of something damaged, the crack of something that has been sealed too long finally letting air in. "I am not special," he said, his voice coming out different from usual, less careful, more himself. "I am not from a powerful bloodline. I am not carrying ancient gifts. I am just a person who ran because the alternative was worse. There is no twist. There is no secret that makes me worth this." "I know," Calum said. He said it simply, without decoration. "The way you say something that seems obvious to you. I know that, and I am standing here anyway." "Oh," Wren said. It was not an eloquent response. It was just the sound that a person makes when something they had stopped believing in turns out to be real. Then the door of the library burst open. Guards, 6 of them, and behind them, Silas Morn, with his reader extended, and Lord Aldrich with his collector's eyes, finally understanding what he had been sitting next to all evening. "The Commission has authority," Morn said, stepping into the library with the confidence of someone who has never had that authority genuinely challenged. "The Omega is unregistered. Apprehension is lawful under Article 7 of the Registration Act." Now Calum stepped forward. The guards raised their crossbows. "Your Majesty," Morn said pleasantly, "I would strongly advise against interference. The Council has oversight authority in commission matters. Any obstruction by Crown authority creates a constitutional." "Then we have a constitutional problem," Calum said, his voice having the quality of stone now. "Something that was not going to move, because I am not stepping aside." "This is not about him," Wren said. Both men looked at him. Wren felt 10 years of survival instinct screaming at him to be quiet, to be small, to find the exit and use it. He ignored all of it. "This is not about him," he said again. "He should not have to spend political capital protecting me." He looked at Morn. "You want me registered? Then register me. And while you are doing that, I want the court present to witness it. As I want every noble who sat at that table tonight to watch the commission process a person who has worked in this palace for 10 years, who has done nothing wrong, who has harmed no one, and tell me afterward what exactly the law is protecting." The silence that followed was the silence of a room recalculating. "I am not powerful," Wren said. "I am not special. I am not going to transform into something ancient or summon any kind of gift. I am just a person. And if the law says that is enough to put in chains, then the problem is the law." Morn looked at him, then at the king, then at the guards behind him, who were beginning to look uncertain in the particular way that people do when the thing they were told was simple turns out to be complicated. "This will not end with you," the Grand Registrar said, his pleasantness having an edge underneath it now. "There are hundreds of them, thousands perhaps. You cannot protect them all." "No," Calum agreed, "but I can start somewhere." He turned to the Commission's guards at the door. The thing about Alpha commands was that they were not volume. They were not aggression. They were simply the quality of certainty in a voice that had never been given a reason to doubt itself. "Go home," the king said. They went, all of them except Morn, who stood alone in the library doorway with his reader still extended and the sudden awareness that the room had changed around him while he was not paying attention. Calum looked at him with the grey eyes that held light inside them. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Council chambers. Bring your documentation. All of it. I will be bringing mine. If you are not standing up and making noise right now, I do not know what else I can give you. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you felt in this moment, because I need to know I am not the only one." The Commission's dissolution took 4 months. Wren knew this later. At the time, he experienced it mostly as a series of days in which the palace felt like a building in the process of being rebuilt, while people were still living in it. He kept working in the kitchens, because it was what he knew, and because he had not yet worked out how to be anything other than useful while the world was deciding what to do with him. The king came to the kitchen sometimes in the evenings, not to inspect, not officially, just to stand at the end of the bread table with a cup of something warm and talk, or not talk, while Wren worked. They had conversations in those evenings that had nothing to do with commissions or politics or the law. Conversations about books and about the border regions, and about what the king remembered of his father, and what Wren remembered of being 17 and afraid on a road to a city he had never seen. Nobody in the palace said anything directly, but the way that people arranged themselves around them changed. The subtle geography of the kitchen staff shifted to include the king as a natural presence in their space. Helena, the head of house, stopped giving Wren the scheduling assignments that kept him out of the public rooms. Small things, the kind that add up to something large before you have thought to name them. The formal registration hearing was held on a Tuesday. The council chambers were full. Was not just with council members, but with people from the city, from the lower quarters, people who had heard somehow that something was happening and had come to watch it happen. Wren stood at the center of the chamber floor in his plain work clothes and gave his real name for the first time in 10 years. His name, his age, his pack of origin, gone now, but real, his status. And Calum Ashenvale stood beside him and said to the assembled council in the voice that had once sent commission guards home from a library, "I am moving to repeal the Registration Act in its entirety and replace it with a protection statute, not for omegas specifically, for all persons. The principle that a person's biological designation does not constitute grounds for state control, documentation, or trade." There were arguments. There were several. The king listened to all of them. Then he said, "I understand your concerns. I am doing it anyway." The vote was not unanimous. It did not need to be. The act was repealed by the end of the month. Wren stood on the palace walls the evening after the vote and watched the city below and tried to feel the size of what had happened and found that it was too large to feel all at once. It would come in pieces, he thought, for a long time, in the moments when he did not expect it. He heard footsteps on the stone behind him, the weight of them familiar in a way that 10 years ago he would not have let himself notice. "Regrets?" Calum asked. Wren thought about it honestly, the way the king had taught him to by example. "I spent 10 years making myself invisible," he said, "and the thing I thought I was hiding from was the law. But the thing I was actually hiding from was this." He gestured, not at the city, at the space between them, at the warmth of it, at the terrifying ordinary reality of being known by someone and not destroyed by it. "And is this something you are still afraid of?" Calum said carefully. Wren turned to look at him. "Every day," he said, "but I am here anyway." The king looked at him with those grey eyes that held light inside them. "So am I," he said. The claiming was not a grand ceremony. There was no court assembled, no herald announcing anything. It was a quiet evening in the library, where it had started, with moonlight coming through the tall windows and the dust motes moving, and two people who had arrived at the same place by very different roads. Wren let himself be seen completely for the first time in 10 years. Not as powerful, not as special, not as the hidden heir to anything or the last of any line, just as himself, with his 10 years of carefully maintained distance, and his worn-down suppressant supply, and his talent for bread, and his habit of reading the exits in every room he entered. And Calum Ashenvale, who could have had anyone in the 7 kingdoms, looked at all of it and said, "Yes, this, you, exactly as you are." The mark was placed in the old way, quietly, a seal of intent rather than possession. Wren felt it like something settling, like the compass needle that had been swinging for 5 years, finally finding true north and going still. 3 months later, the palace had changed, not dramatically, not all at once, the way that real change happens, which is slowly and then suddenly and then so thoroughly that people forget it was ever otherwise. The kitchens were the same kitchens. Wren was still in them most mornings because the bread did not make itself and because there was a particular piece in the rhythm of it that he had no interest in giving up. But the door to the rest of the palace was open now, and the door to the rest of the city. People came, slowly at first, then in a way that required organizing. Omegas, who had been hiding in the city for years, some for longer than Wren had been hiding, some with children born in hiding, raised to be invisible, knowing only the version of the world that said they had to be. Wren met them in the lower hall on Tuesday mornings, which had started as an informal arrangement and had gradually become something with a name and a purpose and a small but growing staff. He was not a counselor. He was not a social reformer. He was just a person who had worked out how to survive and was willing to explain how he had done it to anyone who needed to know. Some of them were afraid of the king. Reasonably, he was the king. Wren would tell them, "He is the person who stood between me and a commission reader in the grand hall with 200 people watching. He is the person who came to the kitchens in the evenings just to sit in the same room. He is the most honest person I have encountered in 10 years of meeting people who were not honest with me or with themselves." And then he would say, "But you do not have to trust him on my word. You can find out for yourself. That is the point. That is what all of this is for." The king came to the Tuesday meetings sometimes, not to preside, just to be present, to answer questions directly when they were asked of him, was to sit at the same level as everyone else in the room and demonstrate with his body, as well as his words, that the old geometry was not the geometry anymore. One afternoon after the others had gone, Calum sat beside him at the long table in the lower hall and said, "You know you do not have to run these. You did not ask for this." "I know," Wren said. The king waited. "I spent 10 years making myself small so nobody would look at me," Wren said. "And now I have the option to be visible. It turns out visibility is terrifying, and I choose it anyway. Every Tuesday." He looked at Calum. "I think that is what you do too, actually. Every day. The throne is visible in ways that are probably also terrifying." Calum looked at him for a moment. "Yes," he said, "but it is easier than it used to be." Wren understood what he meant. He did not say it out loud. He did not need to. They sat together in the lower hall while the afternoon light came through the windows and the palace moved around them with the ordinary business of a place in the process of becoming something different than it had been. Not magic, not ancient bloodlines resolving into destiny, just a man who had been hiding for a long time, and a king who had been looking, and a law that had been wrong and was now being made right, and Tuesday mornings, and bread, and the terrifying, ordinary, extraordinary fact of being known. Sometimes we spend so long hiding the parts of ourselves that the world told us were problems that we forget those parts are not the problem. The world was the problem, and sometimes the world changes, not because of power or magic or destiny, because someone stood in a library and said, "I see you, not what you are hiding, you," and meant it, and someone else, after 10 years of careful invisibility, decided to believe them. That is the story of Wren, the boy who ran at 17 and stopped running at 27, not because he was finally safe, but because he finally had somewhere to run to instead of just away from. If this story meant something to you, leave me a comment below. Tell me what stayed with you. Tell me if you have ever hidden something about yourself for so long that you forgot it was not the truth of you. I read every single one, and I will be here. Hit that like button if this one got into your chest the way it got into mine when I wrote it. Subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story. And share this with someone who needs to hear that ordinary people doing quiet, brave things is enough. Or it is always enough.